Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Tiriyat Nashtaprayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttam Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki. So continuing with the discussion on Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Antya Lila, chapter 5, how Pradyumna Mishra received instructions from Ramanand Bai. Text 109 onwards. So a devotee came to Bhagwan Acharya with his some compilation, and Bhagwan Acharya went to Sarup Damodar Goswami to first read it if it is okay, principally, and then they would present it to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. भगवान आचार्य कहे सुन एक बार तुम्ही सुनिले भाला मंद जानी भे विचार. Despite the explanation of Sarup Damodar, Bhagwan Acharya requested, please hear the drama once. If you hear it, you can consider whether it is good or bad. दुई तीन दिन आचार्य आग्रह करीला तार आग्रह स्वरूपेर सुनीते इच्छा. For 2 or 3 days, Bhagwan Acharya continually asked Sarup Damodar Goswami to hear the poetry. Because of his repeated requests, Sarup Damodar Goswami wanted to hear the poetry written by the Brahman from Bengal. Savalaya Swarup Gosai Shunite Vasila Tabe Sei Kavi Nandi Shloka Padila. Sarup Damodar Goswami sat down with other devotees to hear the poetry. And then the poet began to read the introductory verse. Vikacha Kamala Netre Shri Jagannatha Sange Kanaka Ruchir Ihatmani Atmatam Ya Prapanna Prakriti Janam Ashesham Chetayan Avirashit Sadishatu Tav Bhavyam Krishna Chaitanya Deva. The Supreme Personality of Godhead has assumed a golden complexion and has become the soul of the body named Lord Jagannath, whose blooming lotus eyes are widely expanded. Thus he has appeared in Jagannath Puri and brought dull matter to life. May that Lord Shri Krishna Chaitanya Deva bestow all good fortune upon you. श्लोक सुनी सर्वलोक ताहा रेवा खान स्वरूप के ए श्लोक करा व्याख्यान. When everyone present heard the words, they all commended the poet. But Sarup Damodar Goswami requested him, kindly explain this verse. Kavi kahe Jagannath sundara sharira Chaitanya Gosai shariri mahadhira. The poet said, Lord Jagannath is a most beautiful body, and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is exceptionally grave, is the owner of that body. Shariri refers to a person who owns a sharir or body, as stated in Bhagavad Gita, Dehino asmin yatha dehe komaram yoganam jara. As the embodied soul continuously passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. For the ordinary living being in material existence, there is a division or distinction between the body and owner of the body. In spiritual existence, however, there is no such distinction, for the body is the owner himself and the owner is the body itself. So there is no difference, body and soul, it's all one. In spiritual existence, everything must be spiritual. Therefore, there is no distinction between the body and its owner. Sahaje jad jagater chetan karaite nila chale Mahaprabhu haila avirbhute. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has appeared here in Nilachal, Jagannath Puri to spiritualize the entire dull material world. Shuniya sabara haila anandita man, dukha paya swarup kahe, sakroda vachan. Hearing this, everyone present was greatly happy. But Sarup Damodar, who alone was very unhappy, began to speak in great anger. Now see what Sarup Damodar Goswami has to say. Are murkha apanar kaili sarvanash, duita ishware tora, nahika vishwas. You are a fool, he said. You have brought ill fortune upon yourself, for you have no knowledge of the existence of the two lords, Jagannath Dev and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, nor have you faith in them. Purnananda Chitta Swarup Jagannath Rai, Tare Kaili Jada Vinashwar, Prakrita Kai. Lord Jagannath is completely spiritual and full of transcendental bliss. But you have compared him to a dull, destructible body composed of the inert external energy of the Lord. So this is how he explained. If one thinks that the form of Lord Jagannath is an idol made of wood, he immediately brings ill fortune into his life. According to the direction of the Padma Puran, Archa Vishnu Shilati, anyone who considers the deity in the temple to be made of stone or wood is a resident of hell. Thus, one who thinks that the body of Lord Jagannath is made of matter and who distinguishes between Lord Jagannath's body and his soul is condemned, for he is an offender. A pure devotee who knows the science of Krishna consciousness makes no distinction between Lord Jagannath and his body. He knows that they are identical, just as Lord Krishna and his soul are one and the same. When one's eyes are purified by devotional service performed on the spiritual platform, one can actually envision Lord Jagannath and his body as being completely spiritual. The advanced devotee therefore does not see the worshipable deity as having a soul within a body like an ordinary human being. There is no distinction between the body and soul of Lord Jagannath, for Lord Jagannath is Satchitananda Vigraha, just as the body of Krishna is Satchitananda Vigraha. There is actually no difference between Lord Jagannath and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But the ignorant poet from Bengal applied a material distinction to the body of Lord Sri Jagannath. So that's why we've got to be very, very careful. Who do we listen to? Because it can just confuse ourselves and we can become offenders also. Purna Shad Aishwarya Chaitanya Swayam Bhagwan, Tare Kaili Shudra Jiva Sfulinga Sama. We have calculated Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, full in 6 opulences, to be on the level of an ordinary living being. Instead of knowing him as the Supreme Fire, you have accepted him as a spark of fire only. In the Upanishads, it is said, Yathagnera Vishwalinga Vyucharanti. The living entities are like sparks of fire, and his lordship, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is considered the original great fire. When we hear this Shruti Vakya or message from the Vedas, we should understand the distinction between the Supreme Lord Krishna and the living entities. A person under the control of the external energy, however, cannot understand that distinction. Such a person cannot understand that the Supreme Person is the original great fire, whereas the living entities are simply small fragmental parts of that Supreme Personality of Godhead. It just, people cannot understand this. As Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Mamai Vancho Jiva Loke Jiv Bhuta Sanatana. The living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the 6 senses, which includes the mind. So there is a distinction between the body and soul of the materially existing living being. But because Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Lord Jagannath do not possess material bodies, There is no distinction between their bodies and souls. On the spiritual platform, body and soul are identical. There is no distinction between them. As stated in Srimad Bhagavatam, Etadishanam ishasya prakritisto api tadguna. This is the divinity of the personality of Godhead. He is not affected by the qualities of material nature, even though he is in contact with them. Similarly, the devotees who have taken shelter of the Lord cannot be influenced by the material qualities because they go beyond the material qualities. His Lordship, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, is unaffected by the influence of the three modes of material nature. Indeed, his devotees are also unpolluted by the influence of the external energy because they engage in the service of his Lordship. Even the very body of a devotee becomes spiritualized, just as an iron rod put into fire becomes as qualified as fire because it becomes red hot and will immediately burn anything it touches. Therefore, the poet from Bengal committed a great offense by treating Lord Jagannath's body and Lord Jagannath, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as two different entities, material and spiritual, as if the Lord were an ordinary living being. So Jagannath's body, and all spiritual, all transcendental. It just, the Lord appears in this form to give us a chance to serve him. Otherwise, it's all spiritual. The Lord is always the master of the material energy. Therefore, he is not doomed to be covered by the material energy like an ordinary living entity. Dui thai aparade paibi durgati, ei tattagya tattva varne tare ei riti. Sarup Damodar continued, because you have committed an offense to Lord Jagannath and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, you will attain a hellish destination. You do not know how to describe the absolute truth, but nevertheless, you have tried to do so. Therefore, you must be condemned. The Brahman poet from Bengal was an offender in the estimation of Sarup Damodar Goswami. For although the poet had no knowledge of the absolute truth, he had nevertheless tried to describe it. The Bengali poet was an offender to both Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Lord Jagannath, because he had made a distinction between Lord Jagannath's body and his soul, and because he had indicated that Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was different from Lord Jagannath. He had committed offenses to them both. A tattagya refers to one who has no knowledge of the absolute truth, or who atattagya, not a tattagya, sorry, or who worships his own body as a supreme personality of Godhead. If an ahangro pasak mayavadi, a person engaged in fruitive activities, or a person interested only in sense gratification, describes the absolute truth, he immediately becomes an offender, because they cannot describe it properly. Not according to the scriptures. Are ek kariyacha param parmadha, deha dehi bhed ishware kaila aparadha. You are in complete illusion, for you have distinguished between the body and soul of his Lordship, Lord Jagannath or Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. That's a great offense. The poet must be thinking, I just told him one shloka and I got chastised so badly. When one differentiates between the body and soul of the Supreme Personality of God, it immediately becomes an offender. Because the living entities in the material world are generally covered by material bodies. The body and the soul of an ordinary human being cannot be identical. The Supreme Lord bestows the fruits of one's activities, for he is the Lord of the results of fruit and action. He is also the cause of all causes, and he is the master of the material energy. Therefore, he is supreme. An ordinary living being, however, in his material condition, experiences the results of his own fruitive activities and therefore falls under their influence. Even in the liberated stage of Brahma Bhuta identification, he engages in rendering service to his Lordship. Thus, there are distinctions between an ordinary human being and the Supreme Lord. So we are here to serve the Lord. Lord is not here to serve us or serve material energy. He is a master of the material energy. Huge difference between us and Krishna. Karmis and Jnanis who ignore these distinctions are offenders against the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. An ordinary human being is prone to be subjugated by the material energy, whereas His Lordship, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Lord Krishna or Lord Jagannath, is always a master of the material energy and is therefore never subject to its influence. His Lordship, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, has an unlimited spiritual identity, never to be broken, whereas the consciousness of the living entity is limited and fragmented. The living entities are fragmental portions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead eternally. Mame vancha jivloke, jivbhuta sanatana. It's not that they are covered by the material energy in conditioned life, but become one with the Supreme Personality of Godhead when freed from the influence of material energy. Such an idea is offensive. So it's not like we are in the material world covered by material energy, so we are separate. But when we become self-realized, we'll become one with God. Not going to happen. According to the considerations of Mayavadi fools, the Supreme Personality of Godhead accepts a material body when he appears in the material world. So this is how they think. A Vaishnava, however, knows perfectly well that for Krishna, Lord Jagannath, or Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, unlike for ordinary human beings, there is no distinction between the body and the soul. Even in the material world, his Lordship retains his spiritual identity. Therefore, Lord Krishna exhibited all opulences even in his childhood body. There is no distinction between the body and the soul of Krishna, whether he is in his childhood body or his youthful body. He is always identical with his body. Even though Krishna appears like an ordinary human being, he is never subjected to the rules and regulations of the material world. He is always a master. Even when he was little baby sleeping in the bed, he is always a Supreme Personality of Godhead. It's hard to understand, no doubt about it. How he is born and then he's a little baby, then he grows and becomes a young boy. So people, that's where they get confused, that he is also doing, and he is doing so many pastimes, so stealing butter, stealing clothes. Why? So first of all, that doesn't mean he's not the Supreme Lord. He is the Supreme Personality, always. But he wants to perform his pastimes. Who can stop him? He can do whatever he wants. He is never subjected to the rules and regulations of the material world. He is Swarat, or fully independent. He can appear in the material world, but contrary to the offensive conclusion of the Mayavad school, he has no material body. In this connection, one may again refer to the above-mentioned verse from Srimad Bhagavatam. Eda deshanam ishasya prakriti stho api tadgune. The Supreme Person has an eternal spiritual body. If one tries to distinguish between the body and the soul of the Supreme Personality of God, he commits a great offense. So that's why Swarup Damodar He would look at every composition. If this Brahman had gone to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu with these words, how angry Mahaprabhu would have. Ishwarera nahi kabhu deha dehi bheda, swarup deha chidananda nahi kabhi bheda. At no time is there a distinction between the body and soul of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. His personal identity and his body are made of blissful spiritual energy. There is no distinction between them. Lord Krishna, the son of Nanda Maharaj, is Advaita. In other words, there is no distinction between his body and his soul, for his existence is completely spiritual. So according to the verse from Srimad Bhagavatam, beginning the verse, Vadanti Tat Tattva Vidas, the absolute truth is always to be understood from three angles of vision as Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. So unlike the objects of the material world, however, the absolute truth is always one and always the same. Thus, there is no distinction between his body and his soul. His form, name, attributes, and pastimes, therefore, are completely distinct from those of the material world. One should know perfectly well that there is no difference between the body and soul of the Supreme Lord. When one conceives of a distinction between the Lord's body and his soul, one is immediately conditioned by material nature. Because a person in the material world makes such distinctions is called Baddhaji, a conditioned soul. So again and again, same point, that the body and soul of the Lord are non-different, they're same, one. And similarly, when the Lord appears as a deity form in maybe a wood body or a stone body, metal body, but they're all spiritual. Dehe dehe vibhagoyam na ishvare vidyate kvachit. There is no distinction between the body and soul of the Supreme Personality of Godhead at any time. At any time. Next two verses, I'll just go to the translation. O my Lord, I do not see a form superior to your present form of eternal bliss and knowledge. In your impersonal Brahman effulgence in the spiritual sky, there is no occasional change and no deterioration of internal potency. I surrender unto you because, whereas I am proud of my material body and senses, your Lordship is the cause of the cosmic manifestation, and yet you are untouched by matter. This present form or any transcendental form expanded by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Shri Krishna, is equally auspicious for all the universes. Since you have manifested this eternal personal form upon whom your devotees meditate, I therefore offer my respectful obeisances unto you. Those who are destined to be dispatched to the path of hell neglect you neglect your personal form because of speculating on material topics. So they are destined to be dispatched to the path of hell. So these are from Srimad Bhagavatam. So anyway, I guess we can stop here and see more chastisement by Swarup Damodar Goswami tomorrow. Anybody has any questions or comments? Okay, you all have a safe and wonderful day. Hare Krishna. Jai Shri Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhuji.